being torn apart from the inside by giant wooden stakes, having your body blasted to pieces by a gunpowder cannon, being endlessly tortured by none other than Barney the purple dinosaur. And shockingly, those were the merciful ones. Welcome to the world's worst punishments ever recorded in human history. Sometimes you just have to accept defeat, especially when those feet are being mercilessly beaten. Known as falaka, or the simple foot whipping, this punishment is exactly what it sounds like. A thick knotted cane slams against the soles of the victim's feet again and again. Because the soles are packed with nerve endings, a heavy beating could cripple someone for life. It's been seen across the world, from the US and Mexico to Nazi Germany, fascist Italy, colonial India, Cambodia, and China. It was so common it even appeared in Shakespeare's As You Like It, in Mark Twain's writing, and Mozart's The Magic Flute. Disturbingly, there's still evidence of it being practiced today in parts of Africa and the Middle East. Imagine being tortured and humiliated simply for speaking your mind as a woman. That was the twisted purpose of a metal device called the scold's bridle. From the 1500s to the 1800s across Europe, women accused of being scolds, meaning they gossiped, spoke rudely, or just annoyed a man, could be sentenced to wear it. A cage of iron locked around the head, with a spiked gag pressing the tongue down to stop them from speaking. To make it worse, they were paraded through town while the crowd mocked and threw things. Humiliation turned into entertainment. If this donkey gives you a ride, you might end up doing a painfully accurate wishbone impression. Also called the chevalet or the wooden horse, this device was used during the Inquisitions, and even as late as the American Civil War. The victim was forced to straddle a sharp wooden beam like a narrow horse's back, the ridge cutting between the buttocks. Heavy weights hung from the feet made the pain unbearable. Some bled out, others died from infection. Survivors were left mutilated for life. Even Paul Revere, the American hero, was rumored to have used it. This next wooden contraption didn't split bodies, it split dignity. For minor crimes, offenders were locked by the neck and hands into a wooden frame in a public square. Their hair was shaved, their faces exposed, and the townsfolk were invited to throw whatever they pleased. Rotten food, stones, even worse. Many confuse it with the stockade, but here's the difference. The pillory binds your head and neck while the stockade traps your feet. It finally disappeared in the 1900s. Except in Delaware, where it remained legal until 1905. We'd give this invention a big thumbs up, if our thumb still worked. The thumbscrew, a small but horrifying device, was designed to crush bones with terrifying precision. The victim's thumbs were placed between metal bars and slowly squeezed by a screw. Some versions had spikes that pierced the nails before crushing the bone. If that wasn't enough, there were versions made for toes and entire hands. Life in organized crime might look glamorous, but in Japan's Yakuza, a mistake can cost you your finger. Known as yubitsume, or finger shortening, this ritual forces members to slice off the top joint of their pinky with a razor-sharp tanto blade to atone for failure. The severed piece is then respectfully delivered to the oyabun, the family boss. Think of it as a blood-stained apology letter, permanent and unforgettable. If being roasted alive isn't your thing, steer clear of the brazen bull. Legend says an Athenian engineer named Perillus built this bronze beast for the tyrant Phalaris, who then decided to test it on its own creator. The victim was locked inside the hollow bull while a fire burned beneath. As the body cooked, smoke poured from the nostrils and screams echoed like a roaring animal. It's said Phalaris later suffered the same fate. Poetic justice at its cruelest. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, but everyone expected them to destroy your arms. The strappado was one of their favorite tortures. Victims had their hands tied behind their backs and were hoisted into the air by the wrists. Some were dropped and jerked up again, dislocating both shoulders. The agony was enough to make anyone confess to anything. Here's one that will make you clench just hearing about it. The Judas cradle, a pyramid-shaped torture chair with a sharp point rising upward. The victim was lowered onto the tip, which pressed into the most sensitive part of the body. Weights tied to the legs forced the person down further inch by inch until death came through mutilation or infection. And finally, impalement, the nightmare that made Vlad the Impaler infamous. A sharp pole was driven through the body, or sometimes a rounded one inserted from below so the victim slowly slid down by their own weight. Organs shifted, pain unimaginable, death slow and certain. the kind of horror that made people believe Vlad was a literal vampire. A true classic among punishments: flogging. Simple, brutal, and horrifyingly effective. Being flogged meant being beaten with whips, rods, or other blunt tools until the skin tore open and blood ran freely, the kind of pain that left both body and spirit scarred. It's impossible to count all the ways flogging has been used as punishment throughout history, but one of the most infamous remains the savage whipping of enslaved black people in the United States and beyond. Simpler than the Inquisition's devices, yes, but no less horrifying or cruel. This next one will truly blow you away. Known as blowing from a gun, this gruesome method of execution appeared not long after cannons came into use. Most famously used during British rule in India, victims were tied directly to the mouth of a cannon. When it fired, their bodies were obliterated in an instant, sometimes even injuring spectators with flying debris. A brutal combination of spectacle and death, with the audience often too numb to care. A rope, a platform, and one final drop. That's all it takes for hanging. One of the oldest and simplest methods of execution. In the best cases, the neck snapped instantly. In the worst, victims slowly strangled while the crowd watched. Death brought no dignity, only humiliation. Their bodies sometimes reacted violently, voiding themselves or, in men, producing what's morbidly known as angel lust. Hanging really is a hard way to go. Then there's the so-called torture light. At secret CIA detention sites, prisoners have reportedly been forced to endure endless rotations of ear-shattering music. Imagine being trapped for days with Metallica, Queen, or even the Barney and Friends theme blasting non-stop. When the goal is sleep deprivation and psychological collapse, every note becomes another form of agony. The mazzatello, an execution so simple it feels almost industrial. Victims were struck on the back of the head with a massive wooden mallet, and if they somehow survived the blow, their throats were immediately slit. The church that once preached mercy carried out this punishment in public squares, its holy symbols soaked in blood. Beheading was given a touch of elegance with the guillotine. Born from the French Revolution, it was meant to be humane and efficient, but only when the blade stayed sharp. Thousands lost their heads to this polished machine of death. When it failed, however, the scene turned into a nightmare of repeated drops and mangled flesh. Now put down your sandwich for this next one. In ancient Persia, a boastful soldier named Mithridates met his end through a method so vile it seems unreal: scaphism, also called the boats. He was force-fed milk and honey until he couldn't move, then sealed between two wooden hulls, covered in more honey and set adrift on the water. Flies, worms, and vermin slowly ate him alive for days. Whenever he weakened, they nursed him just enough to prolong the suffering. Disgusting doesn't even begin to cover it. Modern execution isn't free of horror either. Lethal injection sounds clinical, even clean, but that's a deadly illusion. Because doctors are forbidden from participating, the process is often handled by untrained staff. Botched injections can leave victims conscious, paralyzed, and suffocating in agony as chemicals burn through their veins. The silence hides the suffering. If you've ever read Edgar Allan Poe, you might recall a fate worse than chains: being sealed alive within walls. That's immurement. Imagine being bricked into a small windowless space with no exit, left to die slowly in the dark. Ancient Rome used this punishment for Vestal virgins who broke their vows, locking them away forever. No light, no sound, just endless waiting for death. A gibbet was like a cage built for humiliation and decay. Criminals were sealed into metal frames shaped like human bodies, hung in public and left to rot. Crows would circle and peck while townspeople passed by. Days later, the bodies were little more than sun-bleached reminders of what awaited the condemned. China took efficiency to new extremes with mobile execution vans, lethal injection on wheels. These traveling death chambers carried small teams who performed executions on the spot, harvesting organs immediately after. Cold, clinical, and disturbingly efficient, it turned capital punishment into a macabre form of logistics. In South and Southeast Asia, elephants were once trained to execute prisoners. To rulers, it was a show of power, commanding the might of nature itself. The beasts could crush skulls instantly or, on their master's order, prolong the agony by tearing the body apart limb by limb. Death by elephant was both execution and entertainment for the elite. Few deaths are as iconic as crucifixion. The condemned were nailed or tied to wooden crosses, left suspended for hours or even days under the burning sun. Death came slowly through exhaustion, suffocation, and thirst. A method so cruel yet immortalized by religion. Europe's breaking wheel might have been even worse. Victims were bound to a giant wooden wheel, their limbs shattered one by one in front of cheering crowds. Hours of slow, deliberate breaking until mercy came in the form of a final blow to the neck. The spectacle was horrifying, but people couldn't look away. Ancient China had its own answer to that brutality: the waist chop. The executioner tied the condemned to a table, then cleaved the body cleanly in half. One swing. Two pieces. The phrase chopped at the waist still lingers in Chinese language today, a grim echo of its past. In Japan, the equivalent was living torso, where skilled swordsmen tested their blades by slicing a man through the torso in a single stroke. Two birds, one terrifying slash. Then there was the tunica molesta, Latin for the annoying shirt, though there was nothing trivial about it. This garment was coated in pitch and set ablaze while still on the victim's body, burning them alive. If Emperor Nero truly used it, as historians suspect, it would fit perfectly with his reputation for theatrical cruelty. Death by sawing was another nightmare. The victim was hung upside down, legs spread, and a giant saw pressed between them. The sawing began at the groin, working upward. Because of gravity, the brain stayed oxygenated, meaning the person stayed conscious far longer than you'd think possible. Every inch was felt, every cut remembered, buried alive. Nothing more needs to be said. Some ancient tribes and rulers, like China's Qin Shi Huang, punished enemies by entombing them beneath the earth. Darkness, air running out, the slow awareness that rescue isn't coming. The mind breaks long before the body. During apartheid in South Africa, vengeance turned inward. Rebels invented a terrifying punishment called necklacing. A gasoline-filled tire was forced over a person's shoulders and lit on fire. The flames burned skin, lungs, and hope all at once. It was meant to send a message, and it did. For pirates, the sea offered its own justice. Marooning meant being abandoned on a deserted island with nothing but regret. No food, no water, no hope. Just the sound of waves and the sun slowly cooking you alive. Some captains even revisited the islands later, only to leave another body behind. China's infamous lingqi, or death by 1,000 cuts, turned execution into spectacle. The condemned were sliced over and over, piece by piece, until their body could take no more. Pain was prolonged deliberately, each stroke a public performance meant to inspire fear and obedience. Life at sea had another horror: keel hauling. Sailors accused of crimes were tied with rope, thrown overboard, and dragged beneath the ship. Barnacles shredded their flesh while seawater filled their lungs. Some drowned quickly, others surfaced half dead, begging for death. And then came the nightmare reserved for traitors, hanging, drawing, and quartering. The condemned were tied to a horse and dragged through the streets to the gallows, where they were hanged but not killed. While still alive, their bodies were cut open, entrails torn out, and their heads severed. The remains were hacked into 4 pieces and displayed as warnings. A spectacle so horrific that even its executioners sometimes turned away. If you were executed by hanging, drawing, and quartering in Old England, your severed head would be proudly displayed on a spike over London Bridge, a grim warning to anyone tempted to defy the crown. Gas chambers marked one of the darkest chapters in human history. Used by several nations, their most infamous use came during World War II under the Nazi regime. Entire groups, Jewish people and countless others, were herded into airtight chambers and murdered with deadly gases like carbon monoxide, hydrogen cyanide, or the pesticide Zyklon B. It was execution industrialized, efficient, silent, and horrifyingly inhuman, flaying, a word that sounds almost polite until you realize it means being skinned alive. Practiced in multiple civilizations, its twisted goal was to peel off the skin in one perfect sheet while keeping the victim alive. Death came slowly from blood loss, infection, or shock. Dermatologists say it's among the most excruciating fates imaginable, and history proves it. Then came the electric chair, the fiery invention of an American dentist in 1881. The idea was simple. A high-voltage current passed through the body, stopping the heart. But simple doesn't mean clean. When things went wrong, bodies caught fire, smoke filled the chamber, and witnesses left traumatized. It's one of the reasons this brutal device has mostly faded into history. Death flights, a term that sounds almost poetic until you learn what it means. Political prisoners in Argentina and Chile were blindfolded, loaded onto planes and then thrown into the sky without parachutes. No trial, no grave. Just wind, silence, and the ocean waiting below. The Colombian necktie, a cartel's signature message. The victim's throat was slit, and the tongue pulled through the open wound to hang from the neck like a grotesque tie. A public, unmistakable sign of what happens when you cross the wrong people. Modern cartels still echo medieval cruelty. Decapitations, mutilations, flayings, all to prove power through terror. Stoning, an ancient punishment that tragically survives even today. Victims are bound or half buried, while crowds throw stones until death comes from blunt trauma. Religious law, cultural rage, and mob cruelty merge in this one act. Even centuries after Jesus condemned it with the words, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone," the world still hasn't learned. Execution by firing squad, efficient, cold, and precise. Soldiers line up, rifles aimed at the heart, and fire together so no one knows who struck the fatal blow. It's been used for desertion, treason, and mutiny. In some countries, families were billed afterward for the bullets, a final insult to the dead. Burning, one of humanity's oldest and most haunting punishments. From witch trials to heresy to so-called bride burnings in parts of South Asia, fire has been used to erase people while pretending to purify them. The pain is unimaginable, at first unbearable, then fading only when the nerves are destroyed, boiling alive, even crueler than fire. Victims were lowered slowly into massive cauldrons of scalding water or oil. Flesh blistered, skin peeled, and death took its time. When it was over, what remained looked more like soup than human. The rack stretched the body until bones cracked and joints tore apart. Ankles and wrists tied to ropes twisted tighter with every turn of the wheel. Limbs dislocated, tendons snapped. It was the medieval dream machine for pain, and nightmare for its victims. Waterboarding takes fewer tools but delivers the same terror. A cloth over the face, water poured again and again until the victim feels they're drowning. No air, only panic. Used from ancient times to modern wars, even trained agents can barely endure it for more than a minute. The mind doesn't know it's fake. It just knows it's dying. Mock executions are torture without blood. Victims are blindfolded, forced to hear the gun cock, sometimes even feel the barrel against their skin, only for the shot to miss. The body reacts as though death is real, flooding with terror. It's psychological warfare, pure and simple. Rat torture sounds like something from a horror movie, but it's not fiction. A rat trapped in a metal container is pressed against a prisoner's stomach. Heat applied to the box drives the creature mad with fear, so it does the only thing it can, dig through flesh to escape. Reports of this torture span from medieval Europe to 20th century dictatorships. The Blood Eagle, a Viking horror that may have existed only in legend, but that's enough to haunt the imagination. The victim was tied face first to a post, their ribs split open from behind and their lungs pulled outward to resemble wings. They say it honored Odin. It sounds more like worshipping madness. White torture is what happens when pain turns invisible. Political prisoners are placed in pure white rooms under constant light. No color, no sound, no sleep, even the guards wear white. Days blur into hallucinations. The mind starts creating horrors to fill the emptiness. No blood is spilled, yet the soul breaks all the same. The pear of anguish looks like an ornament until it opens. Shoved into a victim's mouth, it expanded slowly as a crank twisted, tearing the jaw apart from within. And yes, it was also used in other orifices. Painful, humiliating, and scarring in every sense of the word. And finally, the head crusher, a nutcracker for humans. The victim's chin rested on a metal plate as a screw-driven cap pressed down from above. Slowly, the skull began to collapse. Teeth shattered, eyes bulged. The final pop signaled that the torture was complete. Some died instantly. Others were left alive but disfigured beyond recognition.